just want to say what a fantastic welcome to our fantastic panel and chair for Indy X Fife. After 2 years of being forced apart by global pandemic, there is an urgency to reconnect across Scotland's communities. We've got so many problems and priorities we need to tackle, from shameful national crisis in cost of living and global climate emergencies. So we really also need to look at and reimagine our aspirations for Scotland. So to do this, we have to be inspired, and that's what today is all about. Today is about Scotland's inspiration and Scotland's need to be independent. Indy X is not an organisation, it's just an idea. To get our grassroots back under the one roof, to reignite the vibrant, energising village and town hall gatherings of 2014, when passion was palpable and anything seemed possible. We hope Indy X inspires you to take this idea and either run with it or create your own. We're hugely grateful to welcome our brilliant panel, who now all have seats, to come today to present their latest thinking to advance the case for Scottish independence and to help us move forward together on our common cause. So please join me in welcoming our panel, most ably chaired by our stalwart of independence and community activism right here in Fife, the indomitable Anne Morton.
First of all, can you hear me clearly? Yeah, great. How wonderful that you got yourselves here today. Well done, folks, and a big warm welcome. Times have been horrendous, globally, across the world, and also on our doorstep. I mean, ghastly times, and now we've got the energy crisis, for goodness sake. But here you are, because today is upbeat. Today, we're just going to focus on independent Scotland. So this is a kickstart across all the groups, across all the parties. We need that spring in our step. Now, can you believe the panellists agreed to come when they were told you have 10 minutes to inspire us? And they still came, some of them hours away. So 10 minutes, they've to give us the way forward. Now, they're all known to talk a lot. They can talk for Scotland. I have a bell. You'd never know I used to be a teacher. I have a bell, and if they don't obey the bell, I shall stand up and ring the bell. Otherwise, we'll not get through the programme. The main bit is about you and questions. Now, please, panellists, show respect for one another. We're not having a go at other political parties or groups. And the audience, please show respect for the speakers. It's not about them personally, and it's not party political. It's across Scotland. So your questions will be invaluable. They might spill over when we're evicted from the hall at 2 o'clock, outside mingling, stalls, have a picnic, and keep talking. We want every one of you to go out there and talk to friends, family, neighbours. This is it, folks. Now, the order I have, because we're not sitting in the right order, we start with Amanda. When the bell goes, she hands over to Ian. When the bell goes, Alex Salmond. He then hands over to Colette. And then we have Douglas, Chapman, and then we have Robin. So that's the order. Are we ready? Yes. Right.
Kevin Gore, making sure he's not missing the party.
To be by 12 to kick it.
Come on.
That's the plan for the musician. Okay, for a Sunday morning, that's good for a musician. There's something that are all well blessed called Independence Day. That's why we're all here. Sang this over in Holland, over in Germany, over in Switzerland, and all over Scotland. Standing on the street today with my yes badge on, a stranger he approached me to tell me I was wrong. He said I was a dreamer, I would let him have his say. I said yes my friend, I'm dreaming of the Independence Day. And when that day comes around, coming will for sure. determined of a country that distributes its wealth. Downtrodden people have opportunity, break the chains, free themselves from the traps of poverty. On an Independence Day, an Independence Day. Yes, my friend, I'm dreaming of an Independence Day. And I know that I am fortunate, and I know well off I am, compared to those in Syria or in the Palestine. I'm just dreaming of a country one day we'll be free, determine our own future and our people's destiny. Say, Independence Day, come on, Independence Day. Yes, my friend, I'm dreaming of an Independence Day. Independence Day, Independence Day. Yes, my friend, I'm dreaming of an Independence Day. Yeah, I was marching on the street today, still my yes back home. Stranger, he approached me to tell me I was wrong. He said I was a dreamer, but I let him have his say. I said, yes, my friend, I'm dreaming of Independence Day.
Thank you very much, but thank you very much indeed. Now, last word to the speakers. I hope you like this. Nobody cares what you know until they know you care. I'm going to repeat this. Nobody cares what you know until they know you care. Show us your care, folks. Let's start with Amanda. Each speaker is going to explain who they are.
Great. My name's Amanda Burgauer. I first started getting involved with independence in 2013, doing lots and lots of town hall meetings. It's actually how I met Robin the first time. I've been out campaigning for independence for a long time. I've stood for election. I've been active in my local community. And I'm going to come to this in my speech later, so I don't want to talk about too much of it now, but why are we still here? Why are we not independent yet? And I'm going to talk about that and the route to independence, which might not be what you expect it to be. So that's me.
Oh, if you just continue with your talk, and then we'll pass on.
Sorry, I was a bit confused about that bit. So it's a real privilege to be here today. I want to talk to you about the Indy journey that we've been on, some of us for a very long time. And you know, I feel a bit like I'm in a car with kids in the back after hours and hours, and they're going, are we there yet? Well, we should be. Many of us thought we should have arrived on this journey to independence in 2014. So are we any closer now than we were then? And what needs to happen next? You know, the polling's up and down. We're not really getting any definitive polling. We hope for a referendum, but if we held one tomorrow, are you confident that we would win? Yeah? So, and we're talking about other routes to independence as well. It's being discussed, but there's no one clear way emerging at this time. And yet, right now, if we look south to Westminster, what do we see? Doesn't this affect people's thoughts on independence? A Prime Minister who lies repeatedly, knowing that he won't be held to account? Supported by a coterie of entitled elites and sycophants? running our country for their own purposes and gains? Doesn't this make a difference? And it's not just politicians, but corporations, businesses, and even some third sector organisations too. And these are the systems that we've allowed to be used when at any other time we would have called it corruption, where the constraints of government have been twisted to allow the accumulation of personal wealth and power. And this corruption has increased inequality and taken no responsibility for the lives and well-being of our people. And this isn't about political parties, and that's why I'm delighted to be at a cross-party event. This is about ideals and integrity and holding power to account, where government currently supports overseas corporations who pay no tax because they invest and create jobs. But those jobs can be taken away at any time, as we've seen, and all those profits go offshore. For the decade before the pandemic, already inequality was rising across the whole of the UK. And that's been amplified by COVID. And we've all seen the effects on mental and physical health, as well as loss of income across Scotland. Food banks have become endemic in a country as rich as Scotland. Already, 1 in 4 children in Scotland are living in poverty. And the policies that we have set out to reduce that over 20 years. Well, I'm sorry. We need to eradicate it now. We just aren't going far enough. Our system of local government is centralised and gives very little voice to local communities. And I'm a grassroots community activist, first and foremost. So even though it's those local communities that created the support networks to deal with lockdown, to look after one another during COVID, but now, having been used for that, those local communities are not having much say in what happens. And yet, despite all of this, none of us is shouting out of our window that we are mad as hell and not going to take this anymore. Remember that movie? Some of you might be quite old enough to do it. Because our media doesn't encourage us to shout that we're mad. So apologies to those who don't remember that. It's a film called Networks, well worth looking up. We must remember that our dominant hierarchies have a vested interest in maintaining the current systems to prevent alternative structures from emerging. Dominant hierarchies that we have currently have evolved from power. So don't be surprised, power is never willingly given back. But in democratic politics, where does power ultimately lie? And I'm looking around this room. Political parties create manifestos, which are basically promises of what they'll do in government. But what needs to come first is a framework of constraints that will allow good government to emerge. And I'd suggest that we start by understanding the needs of our people and the role of the modern state, which should be founded on a responsibility to meet those needs, to create stability, and to allow people to prosper. And our problem is, really one of them, that the state is currently interpreted as the facilitation of capitalism. But in the 21st century, capitalism no longer needs the people or mass labour to create shareholder values. We're not in a Victorian age where cheap labour really creates wealth. So it's time to move on from paying off these investments that we treat as debt and to see it as dividends from the investment that meets people's needs, their survival and their well-being in a sustainable way. And incidentally, there is a financial return on that in terms of reduced healthcare costs, reduced need for state support, but the idea is the dividend is in the well-being of our people. Another example would be if you treat your budget as a credit card, defeating climate change is never going to be profitable. But for well-being and sustainability in people's lives, profitability should not be the priority. We want our children and our grandchildren to have a planet to live on. This current system that we have has ossified dominance hierarchies, which is hardly surprising. It's all still rooted in feudalism. My husband's Swiss, so it's maybe inevitable that I'm going to compare their very bottom-up democracy with what we have here, our stilted version. And if the Scottish people are truly sovereign, we should not be waiting for permission for a referendum or watching as our energy industry is controlled by Westminster. And perhaps we would have the confidence to speak up rather than wait for permission. We live in a country with great resources, not the least of which is our people, us. So let's put political parties aside and think about the kind of country that we want Scotland to be. I think most of us would agree that no one should be living in poverty in Scotland in 2022. Right? I think most of us would agree that the climate emergency can't be put on the back burner until everything else is fixed. I think most of us would agree that equality and opportunity should belong to every single person in Scotland, because structural inequality is directly linked to our ability as individuals to participate in society. So it's appropriate that at this cross-party event, we set aside differences and think about the things that we share and what we can agree on. Those areas of agreement should be the basis for a vision for an independent Scotland. And incidentally, that shared vision is a way to get wider support for the independence movement. So we need to reclaim the joy of the Yes movement of 2013-14. And back then, people came together in a way that was both cooperative and collaborative. And the town hall meetings that I went to, and I'm sure that many of you went to, had an energy and inclusivity that was really inspiring. And it brought us all together. And we didn't have all the answers then. I'm going to wrap up very quickly. But while we're talking about independence, it's hardly surprising that many people just don't have the bandwidth to get engaged at the moment, struggling as they are to put food on the table or heat their homes. So what I would say is those of us who are able just need to do that little bit more so that we can come to a position where we've got a shared agenda. And the last thing, very last thing, if Anne will forgive me, is don't rerun the yes-no of 2014. Find agreement, even if it means that you have to walk away from some issues, park them for another time. Let's talk about the things that we can all agree on.
Thank you. Don't applaud till the end or we're going to be very late. And we're going to hand over to Ian next.
Hello, can you hear me? My name is Ian Grant. I joined the SNP via the Edinburgh University Nationalist Club in 1966. Spent about 40 years in the health service and working in and running intensive care unit. And then in more recent times, I suppose why I got invited, partly along with Willie Wilson, I set up the Scottish Independence Foundation and to raise money for the Yes campaign. And we've actually allocated £250,000 to good indie causes, from gazebos in local Yes groups to films by Leslie Ridder to billboards for Believe in Scotland and so on, and lots more. Also, just like the SIF, which was born out of frustration, I wrote a wee book about a year before, the Alba book, which is this wee book, and if Alec will forgive me for advertising it here, but this was because I'd been canvassing round in a new estate near Kirkliston and found that everybody seemed to be English or overseas, and they barely knew what Scotland was, far less what the case for independence was, and a number asked for some written material. I looked through the SNP and I found nothing actually that hadn't been written apart from the white paper for many, many years. And so I wrote it one weekend, got somebody to help me edit it, and we've shifted 80,000 out of 100,000 copies, but there's some more to go which can supplement the Alba book as well. And then the third thing I've been sort of involved in recently is the Independence Forum, which is a place for independence groups to perhaps get together to chat. I know they say we shouldn't talk to each other, but actually before you have a case for the folk at large, you've actually got to form that case. And so that's what we've been doing. Just two other anecdotes after the Kirkliston one. In 2015, after the 2014 referendum, I work in Edinburgh West, which is about the most India-verse area of the country, and the number of voters who came up to me and said they voted no in 2014, but apologised, and you know, they were terribly sorry about it, but they were spooked by worries, threats of job losses in those that worked in the finance industry, and they took the easy way out of Gordon Brown's pseudo-federalism, which of course has not come to pass. A second anecdote, post-Brexit, myself and my two canvassing pals went out and sussed the atmosphere, and we were quite shocked that as well as no people coming to yes because of Brexit, there were yes people who were really spooked by Brexit and the potential complexity of further constitutional change. And so it just showed that this was much more complex than perhaps we thought. Anyway, back to the here and now. As Amanda said, Scotland is in quite a bad place at the moment, apart from what she's gone through it all, basically. But, I mean, if you take one particular thing, this fuel poverty in an energy-rich Scotland just is ridiculous. And we're even having to, of course, pay, if you like, to supply electricity south of the border. And you have to ask yourself why. We've got a parliament, which we didn't have before. We've had an SNP government for 15 years. We've had 6 mandates for independence. And yet, we sort of have a lack of direction. And Westminster, I feel, senses our weakness and lack of direction. They've imposed a hard Brexit. Okay, the UK as a whole voted for Brexit, but they've imposed a hard Brexit, ignoring Scottish wishes and Scottish interests. They've wrecked farming, fishing, seafood, exports, hospitality, and then also the health and social care. I mean, if you think about it, why can't we discharge patients from hospital? Because the care homes don't have the staff to look after them, because these carers have been sent back to the EU. They've used the opportunity of Brexit to basically claw back the powers of the Scottish Parliament, to bypass also the Scottish Parliament with really scarcely a whimper from Holyrood. As I've said, they have helped themselves to our oil and gas and electricity, even charging us for the privilege of sending our electricity south. And so generally, the UK government has ridden roughshod over Scotland. Now, I think never has independence been so urgent and so necessary as now. And, you know, that goes despite all the other issues, because we can't solve the other issues without independence. And so this sort of frustration that was running through me was certainly behind writing this wee book. And I think it's been quite useful in terms of trying to paint a picture. So where do we go now? I think the other thing, again, Amanda said, the movement is not just the parties, the fact that we've got 2 or 3 parties. the movement itself is divided, fragmented, and a bit demoralised, which we've got to turn now. And if the politicians won't provide a lead, we in the movement, I think, have got to do the work. Lots has been done, in fact, by lots of groups, SIC with their transitions, Commonweal on my right, Scottish Currency Group and the Constitution groups. But I think this has all got to be brought together. And that was partly behind my trying to get the Independence Forum working, so that we could actually try and find a site where the various groups could contribute together. And the trouble is, I'm conscious of a politician on my left-hand side, but you know, politicians tell us in the movement to go out and preach the case for Indy, but that's fair enough. But in fact, most voters actually have a fair idea of the case. It's that the people in Scotland are the best people to run Scotland. You know, that's apart from a few hardline Brit-Nats, which is probably about a third of the population. But as I illustrated in the first story, many potential yesers have fears and worries. They need to be addressed, and they haven't been, because we're still 47% yes, or 47, 50, as opposed to the 45% that we achieved in 2014. And not only do they have to have these questions addressed, but they have to know how we get to independence. So my point, and I think what I've tried to do in the book, is to tell a story. We need a narrative, a story. The basic case for Indy, the story of how we get there, perhaps where we've come from, where we are now and how we get there. A vision for a new Scotland, a vision that replaces the tired old colonial model which has increasingly been imposed on us, especially since the UK lost its actual empire. And in that process, we need to both paint a picture and answer the questions and end the people's doubts. I don't think we can simply do that by saying dissolve the union, as I don't know if he's here, Peter Bell from Perth would say that we do. But equally, I think obsessing about referendums and dates of referendums, which may or may not happen, I don't think that is enough either. And I don't think, with all due respect to 2014, that the Scottish Government writing a white paper with civil servants behind closed doors will work either. So somehow we've got, as we're doing here today, engage people, renew the case, work together to renew the case, answer the questions, convince the people. That ultimately probably requires a sort of National Assembly. I'll stop there.
Thank you. On to Alex Salmond.
Well, thank you to the first two speakers. My name's Alex Salmond. I was First Minister of Scotland. I was the one who had the first of the 6 mandates that Ian referred to a few minutes ago. The point about mandates, of course, is you might do something with them, not ignore them. If we want independence, and I assume that most people, perhaps everybody here, is gathered for that purpose, then we have to do 3 things. One is confidence for the people. The second is we have to have an updated case for independence, because the world of 2022 is not the world of 2014. And the third one is we need political will or political strategy. So if I could start with confidence first, let me start with 3 swear words. Lord George Fools. Now, some of you might remember, 10 years or so ago, Lord George Fools was doing a radio interview with Colin Mackay, and he told a startled Colin Mackay that the Scottish Government were conspiring to bring about a situation where there was an appreciable difference in services between Scotland and England, and the Scots ones were better. And Colin Mackay said, but isn't that what they're meant to be doing? And Lord George Fools says, yes, but they're doing it deliberately. Yes, we were doing it deliberately because we believed that if you demonstrated competence in running the show in a devolved government, then that would give people confidence that you could run the show in an independent Scotland. Now, we are no longer, perhaps it's because we're no longer in the flush of administration, but we're no longer in a position where most people, and fair-mindedly, would say that every action of the Scottish Government is reflecting competence. But luckily for us, there are two things we can do about that. One is what was referred to by both our first speakers, and that is confidence is a relative thing. People look at confidence in Scotland relative to confidence in London government. And back in the day, in 2014, Cameron and Osborne weren't everybody's cup of Chianti, but nonetheless were actually a pretty effective-looking team. I mean, Cameron was no Einstein, but he looked like a Prime Minister. Osborne was a nasty wee individual, but he had brains, and together they were quite an effective team. We didn't like them, but that doesn't make them ineffective. Now we face Boris Johnson and Michael Gove. That is the party king and the disco king. So luckily for us, the competence of Westminster is substantially less than it was in 2014, and our actions are. There's a second thing we can do. We have to avoid the independence case being totally associated now with the Scottish Government, because a lot of people are going to get very annoyed about a whole variety of things, whether it be ferries, a subject close to Douglas's heart, or many other things. And it's really, really important that the cause of independence doesn't get totally assimilated into the daily, weekly woes of government. Now, some of that, of course, is all down to mainstream media, and there's a big conspiracy, of course, but there always is a big conspiracy. And if we're honest with ourselves, it's really important that the case for independence is articulated out with government, whether it be by the variety of groups that have been said or by other political parties not encumbered by government. That, unless we get all appointed to government posts, is about the role that we should play as far as giving people confidence is concerned. Secondly, is the case, and Ian referred to it, and Ian, I've got no bother advertising Scotland Independence. I think it's an excellent publication. We should regard them as companion publications. There you are. It's like the Wealth of Nations and the Theory of Moral Sentiments, since we're here in Fife. So the case for independence has changed fundamentally. This isn't 2014, and since 2014 we've had a pandemic, we've had Brexit, and we've had war in Europe. And just to take one of these things, given the time we've got, Europe, Brexit. Now, most people here probably voted against Brexit and were passionately in favour of Scotland being in Europe, in the European Union. But the case for independence has to change because Brexit has happened. And it's no use pretending to people we can get back into the European Union in a day, a week, or a year. It's a minimum of 5 years. And therefore we'll have to negotiate our position as an independent country from that stage. Now, luckily for us, the European Union is not the be-all and end-all of European engagement. There's an organisation called EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, which has 4 members, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, Norway and Iceland. And it can't be a bad place to be, since all these 4 countries are among the most top 10 prosperous countries on earth. But the point about EFTA is you can get into it in 3 months. And once you're into it, you inherit all of the EFTA treaties, including the EFTA trade treaties with the European Union and with the rest of the UK and with the Far East and with everything. And it gives you your negotiating position. So it's just an obvious example of what the Alba book does and what Scotland and independence does. See how balanced I am? Incredible. In terms of updating the independence case to meet the new era that we're in. Not every single person in Scotland will ever read what's in Scotland for Independence or the wee Alba book. That doesn't matter. People like to know it's there. They like to know the answers there. It's like a political manifesto. Folk don't read manifestos, but they like to know they're there. And therefore that's important not just for the people, it's important for every yes activist to know they've got the answers to give confidence to the campaign. And thirdly and finally, it's a question of strategy and political will. What's political will? Well, political will is an interesting thing. It's a bit like trying to describe an elephant, as Ernest Bevin did once. An elephant's actually quite a difficult thing to describe exactly. It's big, obviously, it's got a trunk, etc., etc. It may be difficult to describe, but if one came through your door and sat in your settee, then you'd know what it was. One small example of political will. Political will is like our first week in office as an SNP government, a minority government in 2007. And I was having a conversation with Sir John Elvidge, nice man, Permanent Secretary, Scotland's Permanent Secretary, and the Chief Civil Servant of Scotland. I said, John, look, I don't like the term Scottish Executive. You know, it sounds like a briefcase. Can we not just call ourselves the Scottish Government? John said, oh, well, there'll be big problems there. I mean, legislation, I mean, it's on every letter. I said, who reads the legislation? He says, well, there's yourself, Her Majesty the Queen, and one or two others. I said, but from the people's perspective, is there anything legally to stop us calling ourselves the Scottish Government? And he said, well, no. I said, that's great. Let's get the painters in this weekend, take down all the signs that say Scottish Executive, and put up signs saying Scottish Government. Now, that's a small example of political will. How's it relevant to getting independence? Well, first you have to say that that is your intent and intention. Then you have to mobilise what is necessary, because it seems to me inherently unlikely that Boris Johnson is going to say, once you pass a parliamentary motion, well done chaps, it's all cricket, you can have your referendum or whatever test you want. He's going to say no. He probably won't even say, like Theresa May, now is not the time. So therefore you have to have a political strategy on what you can do to force the hand of Westminster Government. That involves peaceful but direct action, civil demonstration. It involves preparing a legal case. It involves making sure you have, as best as you can, an independence majority in local government, because they are going to be important for that. And it involves international pressure, it involves diplomatic initiatives, all of the things you can do, because what you're actually doing is not fixating on a referendum or an election. What you're searching for is democratic legitimacy, which can be demonstrated. And you have to make life so awkward for the other side, at the end of the day, they say it's less bother to let these go than it is to try and keep them. Last thing's this. How did it happen in 2014? David Cameron was convinced that my secret plan in 2014 was to have a three-way referendum, because we couldn't lose, you know. No, status quo, devil max independence. It was never my plan to have a three-way referendum. My plan was to make him think we wanted a three-way referendum, so that was his one proviso, and everything else was left to Scotland. Now, whether it's a Section 30, then that's not a holy grail, or whether it's an election or any other democratic test, the one ingredient you must have if we're going to be successful is political will. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we have Colette Walker.
Hi everybody. Probably some of you are saying, who's that woman with the guide dog? And that's fine, that's what we're here for today. My name's Colette Walker. I'm the co-founder and the leader of the Independence for Scotland Party, ISP for short. You would think that the name actually told you what we were about, but I'm still called a unionist plant every now and again, but you know, that's what you have to put up with in politics, I suppose. It's really nice to be here today. It's actually very unusual to be actually around all these people and actually not seeing you on a computer screen for a change. So it took me 3 hours to get here today. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think it's worth the travel to get here and start to come together and get this movement going. The ISP was brought about, for those that don't know, for years now we've been talking about how to get a supermajority in the Scottish Parliament, and one of the ways to do that, because of our voting system, was to have a regional list party. So there was a lot of talk about it for many, many years. I am not the kind of person that just likes to go to meetings, to go to another meeting, to talk about another meeting. I'm a bit of a grafter, I like to get on with the job. So instead of just talking about it, we decided, well, why are we talking about it? Let's just do it. So the ISP was formed, it was approved by the Electoral Commission coming up for 2 years ago now. So the whole form was basically to increase the MSPs to be voted into Parliament last May to get a supermajority. We spent the year promoting about the voting system, what the supermajority meant, and we also put out a petition and told people about a plebiscite, trying to tell people that, again, as everybody said here today already, that there's other ways to going towards independence. It's not all about Section 30. It's not all about getting another mandate, because we know that we're going to be refused to Section 30. It's just not going to happen. If they have an inkling that we are going to win, there's no way they're going to do it. So we were trying to educate people, bring people forward and giving them hope that there's another way of actually getting closer to independence. So Alba came along, that's fine, we stood down, we thought Alex would have a better chance at doing that with his profile, and as you rightly said, you were the former First Minister, so people knew you, they had hope. We were at a stage that we were going through COVID. We had been through Brexit straight into COVID, and now we went from COVID straight into, as Alex says, we're going in through to a war in Europe. So it's been one thing after another, but that doesn't mean that we have to forget about our country and our people. Unfortunately, it didn't work out the way we wanted, but we shake that off and we move forward. We can't give up hope. We just celebrated the declaration of Arbroath last week, and as we all know, the famous saying, as long as 100 of us still alive, under no conditions will we be under English rule. Well, I think there's more than 100 of us here today. We're a sovereign state. We are not going to be here that much longer, hopefully, under English rule, because we're going to come together. It's not about one political party, it's not about one particular person, and it's not about one particular yes group. It's about all of us here in Scotland. We are sovereign and we have the right to our say. So this is what we're here today to do, is to move forward, come together and hopefully take us one more step. Now, I think, we're all really saying the same thing, because it's really in our mindsets about what's happening within Scotland and how our money, our finances have been absolutely squandered by the UK government. And I was reading about how, we talk about Norway and the Norway Sovereign Wealth Fund that they have. Do we have one? No, because, I'm sorry to swear, but Margaret Thatcher made sure that we didn't have one. She wanted short-term gain by her policies there for housing and mortgage relief. We don't have that. That is scandalous. In 2022, Norway have a sovereign wealth fund of over £1 trillion. We have nothing. So that just shows, let alone that we need to be independent. As Alex said there about EFTA, it's one of our policies as well in ISP about joining EFTA, because again, we can't join the EU if we get independence. It takes time, we have to prove that. But again, it might not be the right thing for an independent Scotland, and that's something for an independent Scotland to decide on. But EFTA is a really good way of becoming aligned with the European Union and having been in the single market and free movement, etc. And as Alex said there, I think we're probably thinking along the same lines, but I was looking at all the countries that are similar sizes to us: Ireland, Iceland, Norway, Denmark, Finland. All these places are one of the top ranking richest countries in the world. The UK aren't even getting a look in anymore. So this is the type of information that we really need to bring forward. We need to put that out there, out into the public, and I think more has to be delivered about actually where our money's going and what we're not getting in return. So we need to move forward, and I'm not going to speak for too much longer because I think we're all singing from the same song sheet. I think we want to hear from the audience as well. But one thing I would like to say on my last final note is there's a woman that I admire. You will all know Anne Frank. And again, it's quite resonant for what's happening right now with Ukraine, etc. But there was one thing that Anne Frank said, even through her darkest days, she always stayed optimistic, and I always try and look back to Anne Frank, and I always try and get inspiration from her. And one thing she said, and this is my final note, and I want you all to remember this, is, isn't it fantastic that it doesn't take a minute for anybody to improve the world? And that's what we are going to do. Thank you.
Now it's Douglas Chapman.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for all the previous speakers as well. And thanks very much to the organisers today. I think there's a really special event that they've managed to pull off, and thank you for attending. I think it's you know, a symbol of the intent of many of us who want to see Scotland as being an independent country and taking our place in the family of nations globally. I've been an MP now for 7 years, and I was only going to serve one term, but somebody kept having elections. I was a councillor before that for 8 years, and this is one of the schools that we built when I was a councillor. Unfortunately, it wasn't opened by Alex Salmond. He opened some other ones across Fife. I think Fiona Hislop did this one. I've been a member of the SNP for 32 years, and I think I've wanted Scotland to be an independent country probably all my life. So, but since time is limited today, I've sort of broken things down into a couple of 3-point plans. And really, that's, from my point of view, just to try and stimulate a bit of discussion and see where we can take things for the future and give you food for thought. So, I think, first of all, I think we need to state the obvious. You know, I think it's always really good to restate what your main objectives are. And I think, first of all, we need a date for any referendum. 2, we need a campaign. And 3, we need to win. So these are the 3 things. As for a date, we'll go back to that one. The First Minister's already said that there'll be a referendum in 2023. And if you look at the calendar, your obvious times for that would be probably either April or May, or September or October. So we do not have a lot of time to pull things together and get back to the same feeling, I think Amanda suggested, that same feeling of joyous campaigning that we had in 2014. I've got a pal of mine who does a lot like simulated war gaming and things like that. Thank goodness he's not involved in any serious hot wars at the moment, but they do it all on tables and computers these days as well. So I was asking him about, you know, strategy and tactics, and he was telling me that the things he was looking for was have his side really well organised and have a definite plan of their way forward. But he said there's also 2 other things. One is the element of surprise, and the other one is always having a plan B. So, you know, it's that plan B I think we need to try and nudge people towards and push them towards in case our plan A does not delivered or can't be delivered for 101 reasons that the unionists will think up. And I think the main thing is that if the Scottish Government put forward for a referendum, then it will immediately be taken to court by the English Government, and you know we'll be in a stalemate position for years, arguing the toss in courts the length and breadth of the country. So the issue here is, and I think the other thing as well, if it does go to court, then we're not sure of getting an unbiased view from a set of judges. So I think a reasonable plan B, for example, would be if the referendum is held or is not held by the 31st of December 2023, then pro-independence parties will stand on a manifesto that a majority of seats at Westminster, which is in 2024, then if that majority holds, then that triggers our path to independence. And I think beyond that, as of today, if we're holding a referendum in 2023, it could be as soon as 365 days away. If it's the 5th of May 2024, which is the next general election, that's 757 days away. So either way, we have work to do. And that takes us to the campaign. And I would rephrase that. We don't need a campaign. We need a mother of all campaigns. The Unionists, I think the last time, 2024, didn't really think that we get anywhere near 45%. You know, 45, 55 was a bit of a shock to them. Although we knew what was on the ground, and you know, and I think an extra push from our point of view could have got that campaign over the line. But what they've learned since then, they've learned about their own energy supply. Scotland has wind, wave, tidal, oil, gas. We have all that in abundance. And I think they've realised that a lot of that power, that energy, will come from Scotland. And if we're independent in the future, they'll not just be able to take it, they'll need to buy it. So I think that's the realisation is coming to the Unionists as well, that there's a hell of a lot at stake here. And you know, what we're going to see next time round is Project Fear, but Project Fear times 100. So our campaign, I think as Alex said, needs to be full of hope, of positivity, and we need to be extremely confident of taking our country forward to the kind of, and try to develop ideas around making our country the best possible country it can be, that's fair, that's just, that's successful, and make sure that you know, we can get to that third point, which is we need to win. So we all know that 50% plus 1 is enough, but for me, I'd love to win big, because if we win big, 60, 70% of the population vote for independence, that then means that, the question we have put to the Scottish people is not in any doubt to the international community, and it will resonate across the world to make sure that nobody can question the validity of the success of that vote. There's a final challenge, I think, and I think it'll be challenging for a lot of people in this room, of my other three sort of things I was thinking about. And one is how we treat each other. And I think things like respect and how we value other people's in the independent movement, irrespective of their party or group. And we need to find ways to work together. You know, it's quite heartbreaking for me to see a lot of people I've known for decades, you know, sort of ripping shreds out of each other on social media, Twitter and Facebook and so on. Heartbreaking. And I think we've got to get to a point where we can use, you know, you know, think about how we're using our social media to best effect. And there's no point kicking the 7 bells out of the Scottish Government. In reality, the Scottish Government are not the enemy. The enemy are the people who are sitting in Westminster and, you know, have taken billions out of this country and not given a penny back. And you can see that just from the actions of one person, the wife of the Chancellor of the Exchequer this week. You know, so I think in terms of respect and valuing each other, the language and tone that we use on social media is really important. And you know, I was watching I caught a sight of Braveheart last week. Why I stayed up till 1:30 in the morning to see the very end of it, I don't know. But anyway, once you start watching Braveheart, you just can't ignore it. So up till 1:30, still sitting there. But you know, one of the things after, I think everybody's seen the film, but after William Wallace's father is killed, and they're at the funeral, Brian Cox rides up on this big, you know, big charger, I'm Argyle, I'm your uncle, son. And he takes him in under his arm and, starts to teach him about the way of the world. And he has this great big sword. And he said, before you use this claymore, you need to start using this. So just a word to everyone that, today's claymore is your laptop, your phone, your iPad. So before you lift your iPhone or your iPad and send a message to somebody that's not too complimentary, then just give that a little bit of thought. And if I can just have, since I'm the local MP, just have one final second, just to say that I'm also the chair of the parliamentary group on Catalonia, and Catalonia have just announced that the former president or exile president Puigdemont has just announced a council I suppose it's a council of the willing to actually come together and imagine how Catalonia can take forward their argument for independence. And while it's not quite a government in exile that he's trying to do, it's all about bridge building, and it's looking towards a route that they can take towards their independence. I think that route is something that we could follow and take inspiration from as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, here we have our last speaker, and I think we're catching up a wee bit, but I do love a bit of Robin McAlpine.
Aye, no pressure. Best use of social media, stick to cat memes. I'm serious. We're not doing ourselves any good. Everything you say on social media just now is there forever. Everything bad that you say about somebody else, they will remember forever. It doesn't make any difference. Pack it in. Don't do it. It doesn't help. It just causes long-term problems. I'm Robin McAlpine, Commonweal. I'll persuade you that I care over the course of this, I hope. And just to look back to the very beginning, to Amanda's point, there are some people who are still sticking their head out the window and shouting, I'm really mad and I can't take this anymore. It's certainly me. The sheep think I'm mad. This is not good enough. We have to get out of where we are right now in Scotland. We are in a terrible paralysis. And if we do not get out of this, as an independence movement, as a government, as a nation, as a democracy, we will regret it. We need to get moving. So, can we get moving? Yes, we absolutely can. We just need to look at what it is that's wrong. And to give you an analogy of what's wrong, I'm going to put it like this. If you're standing next to a stove and you've got eggs, cooking oil in a frying pan, and you're complaining, where's the omelette? You're the problem. So, here's my question. Do we have what is necessary to win a convincing independence victory? And I'm going to say, I have looked at this again and again and again. If you do the public attitude research, if you do some serious work and look at what people are actually feeling and thinking in Scotland, I have never once looked at it and said, the materials are not there. The possibility of winning is there. So why? Why are we not making progress? Why are we staring at the stove? Why are we looking at the eggs? Why are we not making this happen? So I'm going to say to you something I didn't actually think I would have to say to the independence movement. After 2014, I spent quite a bit of time down in London. The English left, the London left, kept inviting me down because they were moribund and stuck and they had nowhere to go, and we just shown the way with the independence movement, how you can take a grip of things and make things change. And the thing that I said to them all the time was the same. You're marooned. You're stranded in an island. No one is coming to rescue you. You cannot just assemble on the beach, light a fire, and hope somebody will notice that something will come out of the sky and fix it. Nobody is coming. It is us alone. We will make this work or we will not make this work. So, I have hundreds of opinions, absolutely loaded with them. I'm going to try and not bother with any of them just now. So the answers to the questions, I'm happy to do in questions. I'm going to try and keep this short today. Let's see how that goes. And what I really want to get across is that there's some basic things that we need to do if we're going to get out of this paralysis. The detail, questions and answers. The basics, it goes like this. We need to take control. Now, I cannot say this enough. The independence movement, the cause of independence, we have been reactive and we have not been controlling things. We have to start to take control. So we have to control the story. We cannot live in a Scotland where every time pensions come up, it was a question we were asked and we weren't prepared to answer it. And so we spend another week in the newspapers giving bad answers to questions we can answer perfectly well. We need to take control of things like this. When we talk about pensions, we talk about pensions. When we talk about energy, we talk about energy. When we talk about Scotland's future, we choose to do it. We choose how to present it. Now, there are lots of ways that we can do this. But we've got to start saying we have to talk, we have to take control, we have to make it such that when people hear the story of independence, it's the story we planned to tell. It's the story we intended to come out that morning and tell people. That story cannot be about referendums, it's got to be about the lives people of Scotland live and how independence makes their lives better. That's what wins us this. Talking to people about things that makes their life better. We are in a crisis, a global crisis, a national crisis, and lots of little local crises as well. If we want to get out of this, we have for once got to do what the political right does and take a crisis and make it work for us by deciding to take control of it. The second thing that we have to do is take control of the path. I actually have, with respect to everybody, I actually have a problem with the concept of Plan B, because Plan B has got to be part of your Plan A. You have one plan, and if your one plan is based on one path, and it's not until you come to the end of that path that you look back and go down the second path, you've done it wrong. You've got to have every version of the path in your head as you go. And to do that, we need to take control of our debate, our discussion about how we get to independence. That does not mean that everybody going off and doing it themselves in an individual group, great as that's been, wonderful as the work's been, that is not control, that is just a bunch of conversations. So somehow, as a movement, we need to come together and we need to take control of our collective understanding of the path from here to independence. It's multiple options, it's multiple forks and branches, and how we deal with each of these as time passes. You never walk from the start to the end in a stroll without having to deal with debris. There is always debris on your path ahead. We need to take control if we're going to be able to respond to that. We need to take control of the mood. The mood in Scotland just now is down. Heads are down. You can see it everywhere. It's not just the independence movement. The Labour Party's heads are down. The Tories' heads are down. We've come through COVID. We've got a cost of living. Scotland is the kind of country where you take chunks of its land and you give it away to folk at Oscar ceremonies as a wee gift, because we have that little self-esteem in ourselves as a nation right now. This is a nation which sees its own land getting given away as a novelty prize. Now, this is the mood right across Scotland right now. There's a downness about things. Once again, if you think there's somebody coming to lift that for us, you're wrong. We have to lift the mood. We have to take this crisis, and rather than use it as an excuse to talk about how bad things are, we need to convert that back groundwards to give people the confidence and the strength to believe that they can go forwards. Confidence is Alex is absolutely right, confidence is the key. The number one indicator about whether somebody is likely to vote, to drift towards yes or to drift towards no, is how confident they feel about the future. Confident people vote yes. We need to take control of the mood. And finally, well, actually, just 1 second, I'm really not being party political at all here, but we do need to take control of government. We need to get a grip. It is going to be very difficult if we are dealing with the future of independence with bad stories to deal with at the same time. So it would be good if we could get that under some kind of control. But finally, we need to take control of who we are. What do I mean by we? There is, in the most literal sense, virtually no example of a scale of change, the scale that we are asking for, the scale of becoming an independent country in the 21st century. That has almost never happened purely on the basis of a parliamentary process or a single party. From civil rights to all the independence movements to all the major social changes you can think of, it takes more than one thing. Now, we have to be able to come together and create a we, a jointness, a collectiveness. Stay off social media. We need to come together to be able to be the we that can take control. Because you can't do it and I can't do it. The SNP can't do it, Alba can't do it, the Greens can't. There's no one group which is able to take the kind of control that I'm talking about here. So let's decide to be a we again. And once we've decided to be a we again, let's take control of the story, the path, and right at the heart of it, let's take control of the emotion of Scotland to make people believe that this is something they should be excited about again.
Congratulations to the panel. They have shown us that they care. And at one point I was going to burst into tears with Douglas, and then Robin lifted me up, and lots of information and lots of care. So a big round of applause to the panel. Now, we've overrun. We wanted 45 minutes for you for questions. So we've only got half an hour. We have to be out of here at 2 o'clock. But the stalls are there, the questions continue, the conversations continue, loads of information you can pick up. And we really want to be upbeat as we go out of this hall. So I'm going to invite questions from the floor.
Yes, I'm Mary McCabe, Pensioners for Independence. Yeah, I'm absolutely delighted to see this array of people, SNP, Alba, all in the same room, people who are not affiliated to a political party, as we in Pensioners for India are not affiliated to anybody. I do know that people who are professional politicians are increasingly a different species from people who are political activists. Now, this doesn't make the professional politicians, career politicians, or whatever you want to call them, outrageously selfish. It makes them Joe Soap. Most people in the street don't really want to give all their time and money to a cause. They want a career that's got a nice wage and pension at the end and a bit of status and so on. That's what most people want. And increasingly, people who want a career in politics will be drawn to the party that's in the foremost there, which used to be the Labour Party, see what happened to them, and now is the SNP.
And your question
My question is, how do we get the yes groups of political activists who are producing all these academic papers? I'm talking about people like Scottish Independence Convention, Scottish Independence Foundation, Commonweal and so on, producing all these answers to the unionist questions. How much real behind the scenes to and fro is there between them and the Scottish Government, who, as far as appearances go, aren't really answering these questions at all? This is not about the date for the referendum. We have to have the answers before we have the date as a starting point.
Right.
So how much is there between the political politicians? And if I had to direct it to somebody, it would obviously be Douglas Chapman.
Okay, Douglas. Good luck.
No, I mean, I'll probably just give a bypass to some of the things you said about politicians, if that's okay, because we're trying to be collaborative. But I think I think the reason that we need a date is that it concentrates the mind, and I think that's what we should be actually using as a lever to get people together. If we say we've got a year to do this, then that becomes, people begin to take up the challenge at that point. If we say that we don't know when this is going to be, then I wouldn't find that particularly motivating. But anyway, I think coming back to your other point, and Robin referred to it as well, there's a lot of individual groups out there who are doing some fantastic work, Commonweal is one of them. And but I get sent stuff every single day from all the airs of Scotland about why we're not doing this. Why this would be a great idea to develop our energy industry. Here's some ideas on how we innovate in academia and draw academia into business. And so all that is happening, but it's all been done in like little silos. And I think what we really need as a movement is to try and bring that movement back together. Get a repository in the middle somewhere that pulls in all these ideas and the energy that already exists in Scotland, pull it all together, and build that together and make the case for an independent Scotland. All the information that we need, I think, is already there. It's just a matter of how do we best present that. And I think, again, the important thing is how does this change people's lives? And that, again, Robin's point was absolutely excellent. You've got to put that right in front of them and say, this is the concise message we're giving you. If we do X, Y, and Z, then it doesn't matter if you're a disabled person or an older person or whatever. Or a young working person. This is how it's going to change your life
And we have to go to another question. We're just I really want to spread the questions.
Yeah, it's just to ask, why is there no date so far? Because until there's a date, it's going to be hard to mobilise activists and motivate them, far less the public, because there's no point going around people's doors and asking them, what do you think about independence when there's no date? It's like asking someone, oh, what would you do if you won the lottery? Like, it's just futile. So until there's a date, what's the point?
Who would like to answer that? Robin or Amanda? Robin, and you can chip in, Amanda. Right, go.
Yeah. So very quickly, I take a slightly different position in this, which is I want to make sure that we are road ready first. So I'd like to just make sure that the car is properly serviced and the tanks filled before we show our hand with a date. And I don't think we've done that yet. So I've said 100 times, we weren't as prepared as we might have been in 2014, but we had no choice. Nobody in 2011 thought that we were going to have a majority SNP government, a referendum in 3 years. We had to work with what we had. We had a couple of years to scramble something together as a pitch for independence. We have got time now. I mean, I think we've got time. We've had time now. I want to make sure that when we fire this gun, we know we're ready. I don't want to test things out afterwards. I'm personally sceptical that we're going to get a referendum next year. I actually think that one of the key moments is going to be when it starts to dawn on us that we probably don't have an absolutely immediate route to independence, and I think that'll give us an opportunity to have some conversations that we've not been having, I think, in the movement. So you're right that we need to galvanise a moment to get people focused. But before we do that, I just want to make sure that we are very clearly aware between ourselves, all of us, that we are absolutely confident that when we fire the starting gun, we have everything in line, and I don't think we do just now. So I agree that to really move people, it'll be good to have a date, but I also really, really want to win this one, and I do not want to get caught out, any of us, through lack of preparation. So let's get really ready.
Okay, time for another question.
Thank you initially to Alec and anyone else who wants to chip in. One of the greatest fears that I saw previously was about money. What currency are we going to use? And these are the things that we have to have a knowledge about, because these are the questions that people are asking even now. Oh, what about my pension? What about what money? What currency? That's the question. Thank you.
Okay, you all right with that, Alec?
We need our own Scottish currency as quickly as possible, and if you get a copy of the wee Alba book, and I'll be delighted to give you one. Well, there you are, your answers. I don't know if it's in page 37, but it goes on for some length. Robin's laughing because he's the main author of the book. Similarly, the question from me in pensions. I mean, if people had the opportunity, perhaps, to read the wee Alba book on pensions, there wouldn't have been such a fankle about it a few weeks ago. But it's not really about that, is it? I mean, this is about being match fit. I'm not as pessimistic as Robin about the time it takes you to get into match condition, but you certainly have to make the effort. You've got to do the homework. You've got to be, and the trouble with not being match fit is it kind of betrays an attitude that you don't really think you have to be match fit. And listen, I'm not a professional politician anymore. I'm a retired politician who's currently at work. But I know the importance for professional politicians and every campaigner to be match fit on these arguments. And therefore, I think both the Scotland Independence booklet and the Alba book are excellent for doing that purpose. And finally, in the last question, I was going to say, we don't need a date. We need a strategy. That's what we need.
Thank you. Now,
just a funny little question. Why do we need a referendum at all? Because if you think about it, Maggie Thatcher said, if ever we send a majority of independent supporting MPs to Westminster, then that was a mandate in itself. And we've done that several times. So why can't the government just go ahead and give us independence?
Margaret Thatcher actually said it to me directly. But see, the problem was that she didn't think it was going to happen. And while you're quite right, it's in her autobiography, the Downing Street years. You know, if Scotland were never to vote for a majority of independence, then no English politicians, certainly not myself, would gainsay the process. The trouble is, I didn't believe her. You know, she didn't think it was going to happen. She didn't think there would be a majority of SNP MPs. And therefore, the strategy we pursued was to build our own parliament and use that as a mechanism for advancing to independence. But you've got the germ of what's right. I mean, committing yourself to a Section 30 referendum as a gold standard with nothing behind it is ridiculous. All the Section 30 referendum is an agreed legitimacy of a democratic test. As Douglas rightly alluded to, if your tactics are behind a strategy and knowing what you're doing, and all that multiple choice stuff that Robin was talking about is exactly that, then you realise that what you get after is the democratic test, which is not necessarily a referendum, but that has to be part of a strategy.
thank you. Any other comments? What? You do a very quick comment. Good luck.
I go on about this a lot, so here's the super fast version. What is independence? It's surprisingly ill-defined. Independence, when you go right down to an international nation state, is when everybody else thinks you're independent. There's not a club, there's not a thing you sign that makes you're now one of the independent nations. Once everybody else in the United Nations notices, agrees that you're independent, you're independent. So Kosovo's not considered as being an independent nation state, even though it basically is, because nobody's recognised it. So what gets us recognition? The correct answer is it's a recognition deal with the UK government. Right? So that's what makes Scotland independent. As soon as the UK government says, okay, we've agreed it, we've given up, we've got a deal, that's it, the US will agree, everyone will agree, we're done. So the way that I always encourage people to think about this, all we have to do is get a recognition agreement from the UK government. So everything that we do is about dragging them to the negotiating table. Now, the best way to get them to the negotiating table would be a Section 30 order and a referendum one. The second best way might be turning an election into a plebiscite. At the far end, in the most difficult of circumstances, declaring UDI, a unilateral declaration of independence. If we ever got there, the purpose of that would still be to drag the UK government to the negotiating table. So I'm encouraging everyone to think about it in that terms. What we need is some kind of negotiated deal with the United Kingdom. All we have to do is get them to the negotiating table. Whatever we do, that's the purpose. The purpose is to get them there, to accept, game's up, we're beat, they're out, we need to negotiate, and as soon as they recognise us, we're independent, everyone else will recognise us as independent. So think about it in those terms. How do we get them to the table? That's the task.
Thank you.
I've actually got two, but one's really fast. I don't mind who answers it. We're talking about 47.5% showing support for Scottish self-determination at the moment. What percentage of the remaining 54.5%, I can't do the math, what percentage of the remainder are people who are here temporarily, students, or people on temporary work placement, people who are just passing through, people who have, for whatever reason, are in Scotland, not permanently in Scotland, people who don't have a permanent commitment or permanent stake in the future of Scotland. Because if we're talking about referenda, surely the first thing we need to know is what is the proportion of support for independence in Scotland among those who are committed to remaining in Scotland and being part of Scotland, and what is just the local franchise blur factor.
Is that your quick one?
I'll pass on.
Well, basically you deal with the electorate you've got. I believe in civic franchise, and I think we just have to face that down and persuade the electorate. You couldn't have a separate electorate for a referendum than you have for an election. And the rules of being on the electoral roll for an election are very clear. Also, I know that people run this line and they say how difficult it will be to persuade A, B, C. If we think about the Asian community in Scotland, some of whom are first, second, third, fourth generation, but some of whom arrived 3 months ago from the Punjab. If it had been up to the Asian community in Scotland in 2014, we'd be independent, because they voted over 60% for independence. So, but if a generation ago, we'd been at a SNP meeting a generation ago, they'd probably been very worried about the Asian community in Scotland and their attitude to Scotland. This is about work. I believe you can persuade a majority of people on the electoral roll in Scotland to vote for independence, and all you have to do is supply the right programme, the right leadership, the right strategy, because the arguments are so strong. And I know it's difficult, and some people are more loath to vote for independence than others, but a politician or a campaign can't change the electorate. They can only change the campaign to make sure it wins with the electorate they have.
Thank you for that. And Douglas wants to, and I'll take you next. That gentleman there.
Yeah, maybe not to answer your question directly, but I think there are groups in Scottish society that the Yes campaign in 2014 didn't reach, and some didn't want to hear the message anyway. But you know, it's because we're set in their ways of how they wanted to vote. But I think when you look back at previous referendums, the one to establish the Scottish Parliament, for example, needed the SNP to get that referendum over the line. They needed SNP voters and SNP support to do it. In the referendum for independence, there was a lot of Labour voters who went against their party line basically and voted for independence, and that's what got us to probably nearer 45, nearer to 50% than we thought at the time. And for the next referendum, if there's going to be a referendum, that's the chosen will, then we need to get another group of Scots who can help us get that over the line. A lot of the talk at the moment is from the independence side, is from almost a left-wing perspective, and we're ignoring a lot of people who are traditional Tory voters who are disenfranchised with the fact that, you know, we're not part of the EU, who are probably in the past would be described as one nation Tories and so on, who want to live in a fairer society. You know, they're thrilled to capitalism, but you know, and they hold all these values, but they're not. We've not convinced them yet, and I think our campaign next time round needs to be a much wider campaign, so we have a message for all these parts of society that said, you know, in overall, the independence offer is going to be attractive to all Scots, and you know, to take a pride in their country and make sure that we can make it the best country that we can make it with the talents that we have and the resources we have behind us. So it didn't answer your question directly, but I think there's groups in society that we should be looking at to try and widen our scope.
Now this next question, I'm hoping Amanda, Ian, or did you want to add to that, Ian? Yeah.
Yes, I slightly take issue with the politicians on the franchise. When in 2014 I went to collect my son, who's flying in from Cork to vote in the referendum because he lives and works in Ireland and is married there, and Edinburgh Airport was absolutely full of people who were flying in to vote in the referendum. I overheard conversations, and most of them were not going to vote yes. I think there is the two-house issue, that there are a lot of folk who have second houses in Scotland, and I don't know whether they vote in their house elsewhere or in Scotland. And I do think there is some tightening up of the rules. After all, UK didn't allow my next door neighbour, who is Danish, to vote. Well, she can't vote in UK elections, nor can she vote in the Brexit referendum. And I think we're wonderful and open-minded and open to other folk, but I'm not sure it's correct.
So isn't it good that Commonweal's actually done some research on this? The demographics of the independence vote in 2014 are not what you would expect. And the way that that vote, or people's opinions, have changed since 2014 is not what you would expect. So we're all, I'm sure, familiar with English votes for yes, massive pro-Indy campaign movement. And that is actually fairly normal amongst people who have moved to Scotland. Where we have recently lost traction, though, is with people who were born here, multiple generations. And especially, there's a class issue in terms of the vote, and it's a regional issue as well. So there is a report on the Commonweal website. If you want to go and have a look at it, it's in the library. Just do a search for demographics and it will pop up. But I think it's something that we need to be paying attention to identifying the groups that were mentioned before. In my previous existence, I was chair of Scottish Rural Action, and we had our conference here in Dunfermline. One of the things that I had to do in that role is make sure that we appealed to all rural interests. And that's something that we're not currently doing as an independent movement, showing people what's in it for them. And so that's some of the work we need to do in the next year.
And we're going to make this last question.
It's a slight two-part question, and the first part is controversial, which is, does Scotland really, really, really want to be independent, is the question as an Irishman I'm asking. And the second question, the second part of that is about taking action. Why is the Scottish Government not acting every hour and every day as if it is independent? Right now, we're going to need recognition, whatever the plebiscite or whatever the vote is. And right now, we're letting Boris Johnson take a train trip to Kiev, right, when we need Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, Poland and the rest of the EU who despise the Boris Johnson government. We're going to need recognition from those countries. And the Ukrainians need our help, Europe needs our help, and right now we should be acting as if we are independent today.
Douglas. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree. I think on the point that we should be acting as if we're an independent country, and that goes for all of us. And the governments tend to respond to what their electorate ask them to do or tell them to do, and sometimes we need to give a lead. In my own instance, as an MP, I've been trying to set up a ferry service between here and Zeebrugge, something that the Irish people have done exceptionally well. The guy who's advising me set up 3 ferry services from the South Island into Europe. I'm talking to the Nordic Council and looking at how they operate. And I met with Mika Harna, who's a Finnish MP a few weeks ago. In fact, it was the last week of the Scottish Parliament. And Mika is desperate to have Scotland as part of the Nordic Council, so we can act in a much more collaborative, cooperative way, and make sure that our voice can be heard along with our Nordic partners. So, as an individual, I'm trying to look out and act as if my country is already independent.
Sorry that had to be brief, and that is our time up. We have to spill out of the hall outside, but keep the conversation going, keep the questions going. Most of our speakers, I think, are still available, and we'll see you outside. And let's be upbeat, let's have the music, and see how we go.